All right, I see the message that it's now streaming on live on YouTube. So a call to order this special called meeting of the Signal Mountain Town Council and Tree Board. It's Thursday, July 23rd, a couple minutes after 4 p.m. And we will begin with a pledge. And unless someone has requested to do an invocation, anyone? Harry, were you speaking up then?
No, Dan, it was me, Joe Horton, signing in. I was on mute. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Welcome, Joe. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the pledge together. Sam's going to bring a flag up on the screen. It's a little hard to stay together, but that's just how it sounds. And then after that, we will have a moment of silence before we begin with roll call. Pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance.
Flag.
To the flag of
United States
the
of
United States of America,
To the republic.
to the republic for which it stands,
One
one nation,
under God.
under God,
Indivisible.
indivisible,
Liberty.
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Carol, will you take roll call, and you're going to take it for the tree board as well?
I'm only prepared to do it for the council members.
Sam, do you think we need to have someone do roll call for the tree board?
If they have a secretary who is, I would assume, either secretary or chair, probably should.
Probably should, yeah, just because of the legal stuff. And I'd like to encourage everyone, if you're not speaking with this many people on, to keep your microphone muted. But obviously now during roll call, you need to have yours unmuted. So go ahead, Carol.
Vice Mayor Bill Lusk,
Here.
Councilmember Cheryl Graham,
Here.
Councilmember Susanna Murdoch,
Here.
Mayor Dan Landrum.
Here. Andrew, is there anyone who can do roll call for the tree board?
I can. Ann Haygood is muted, but they're present on the screen.
Mute. Sorry about that. Andrew Hodgson,
Here.
Rob Ritchie,
Here.
Michaela Farmer,
Here.
Barbara Womack, Vice Chair,
I think she's muted.
Barbara Womack,
Here.
and Chair Joe Horton.
Here.
I've missed someone. Who is missing?
Jennifer Boyd.
Jennifer Boyd. Yes. Are you here, Jennifer?
Jennifer is not going to be able to meet this afternoon. She's unavailable.
Okay. That was it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sam's our compliance officer, and he's informed us we don't have any citizens lined up to address the council. Is that still the case, Sam?
That is correct.
Okay.
Requested to speak.
All right, just going through the regular agenda, we have no resolutions or ordinances. This meeting is for the purpose of discussion to proposed changes to the landscape ordinance. And I mean, that states what it is. In general, I've had a couple of people say, why are you guys meeting? and the purpose is just that. This is something that changes an ordinance. And so it seemed a good idea for us to have all the tree board present to tell us why and make sure that we understand and that citizens have an opportunity to understand. Go ahead, Ann.
If I may request a slight change on your agenda, proposed changes to municipal landscape ordinance.
Did I say it incorrectly, or is it written wrong? Municipal landscape. Okay. Do we need to vote on that, Harry? Since it's on the agenda?
On changing the agenda to say proposed changes to municipal landscape ordinance?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to vote on that.
Okay. I don't know that we have a landscape ordinance, so we couldn't change it if it doesn't exist.
Yes, just going for clarity. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So that's all. Sam, do you want to go ahead and bring Boyd or Andrew? Does anybody have a specific way? If not, I'm just going to dive in and we will awkwardly figure out our format for doing this. Is that okay?
I think Andrew had a statement he had prepared before starting. Andrew?
That works.
I did. If you guys would be willing to set a time aside, it should take maybe 5 minutes, but I think it provides some background and some context.
Right. That's what we're here for. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Well, first, thank you all for taking the time for setting up this special meeting today. I thought I'd first introduce myself and then provide some background on the tree board, as well as our recommended changes to the municipal landscape ordinance. My name is Andrew Hodgson. I live at 103 Mountain Court. I am a real estate attorney for a general practice firm called Hush Blackwell in Chattanooga. I was appointed as a tree board member in August 2019, and I thank the town council for that appointment. In case you all or other town residents that are streaming this special meeting may not know, the tree board, among its others, runs the annual tree giveaway, the annual Arbor Day celebration, and the town's honor tree program. The tree board also serves to protect and preserve the town's canopy and to help try and keep the town's designation as a Tree City USA, which is a designation by the Arbor Foundation.
Andrew, can you pause for just a moment? If everyone will mute your audio so that we're just hearing Andrew, it'll work better.
Okay. One of the other primary objectives is that we have is the education and promotion of native species, and several of our tree board members put in substantial time and effort in activities with the town's school children with the various schools. I also wanted to highlight one particular success that the tree board had this year. We are quite proud of the designation of the town's first official landmark tree, which is the grand poplar that we estimated to be 285 years old, meaning it germinated around the year 1735. You can actually see it if you're driving up the front of the mountain. You look to your left, just past where the Christmas train is usually located at the stoplight by the CVS. This year we had a specialist come in and install cabling for the grand poplar so that it can live as long as it can. As part of the cabling, town residents have donated funds to help pay for that cost, but we are still accepting donations and fundraising. So if there's anybody interested out there, please feel free to reach out to any of the tree board members. We would love to help. As to the reason for this special meeting, the tree board was asked at some time prior to my appointment to review the town's municipal landscape ordinance and to recommend changes from the tree board's perspective because the ordinance was last updated in 2010. It's important to note that the ordinance is focused on town-owned and public property. The tree board spent 3 regular meetings and 2 special meetings working on the recommended changes that we're going to go through today. And so I'd like to thank the efforts of my other tree board members, who are Barbara Womack, Ann Haygood, Joe Horton, Rob Ritchie, Jennifer Boyd, and Michaela Farmer, as well as our council liaison, Bill Lusk. As some context, our changes fall mostly into 2 buckets. We'd call the first bucket kind of cleanup changes, where we mostly moved existing language to other areas where we thought it made a better fit, and where we updated some of the guidelines to make them more current with the Arbor Day Foundation standards. Like, for example, the classification size of trees for small, medium, and large. We don't consider the changes in that first bucket to be all that substantive in nature, but we are, of course, happy to discuss specifics or answer any questions. The second bucket is what we would call the directive changes, where we updated the ordinance to reflect what the tree board does, what it has recently done upon request, and what would help the tree board achieve its objectives of protecting the town canopy and designation of the town as a Tree City USA. As personnel on the tree board and on the town staff are bound to change over time, we thought it was important for the ordinance to reference the desired look and feel of town properties. That is a focus on native plants, woodland areas, and an abundant tree canopy. All of that is a way to maintain continuity over time. We certainly do not intend for any of the changes we discussed today to materially alter the duties of other town departments, and our changes are recommended changes and remain that. Almost all of us are now gathered here to discuss, and which we would be happy to do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Andrew, very much. And thank you for the work for the tree board that you guys have done. And it's interesting to see this work the way that it ought to, going through the process of making suggestions and bringing it up. So this is good. Unless any other council members or the town manager feels that we need to go over the first part, I think maybe we can jump right to the second part, which Andrew mentioned is it's in your packet is page 7. Begins with establishment and purpose. If anyone else spoke and said you wanted to do something differently, I didn't hear you. Remember, you're all muted. You okay with everything, Boyd? All right, so let's just jump in. The change to the wording in the first line, 13-201. One of the greatest assets of the town of Signal Mountain, Tennessee is its extensive resource of trees, and landscaping is the way that it used to read. You mentioned overall canopy and natural environment. So those are pretty big topics right there. Just to give the council and citizens an idea of where and just why.
I'll chime in first. The reference to overall canopy is important because the town itself has previously obtained a study, a canopy study for the town. And that study was, part of it was reflected on maintaining the overall canopy that exists today, or at least, not allowing it to be reduced more than existed at the time. And so we thought it was important to at least clarify in the ordinance that one of our assets is the canopy of our mountain community. And likewise, the natural environment that goes with it. So we don't know if this has a substantive change, but we think it at least adds value and is important to reference specifically.
There's nothing, and I guess I'll just presumed in everything that we talk about today, we want to watch out for things that are perhaps specific terms of art, that might have meaning beyond. So I guess that's why I'm asking that, just to, not because I have any issue with it. Everybody else okay to move on? I'm seeing nodding heads of those that I can see. Any other tree board members? You can just turn your mic on, and this is a discussion, so there's not much of a formality to what we're doing today. Feel free to chime in. So recommended revisions prepared by the tree board on page 8 of the packet. I'm assuming you guys are using that. You change the term from native to native species. Or you actually added the whole native species. It seems like as I read through this, there might be another place where this is referred to. You removed invasive and changed it to native at some point. Does somebody want to chime in and straighten me out if I'm remembering that incorrectly?
My recollection of the primary reason we made these changes with the reference to one, there was not a definition for native species in the ordinance. So we thought it was important to at least try to define what those are, primarily because we also thought it was important to clarify the tree board's objectives and goals, which is the promotion and education of native species on the mountain, as opposed to what it was previously, which was the removal of non-native species, which is a task too cumbersome and expensive So we thought it was best to shift the focus, and that's really the primary reasons we added references to native species.
Okay.
Correct.
And since this is a municipal landscape ordinance, where to tie this whole thing in, there's not a specific list of what is native. And
We are preparing one.
Okay.
Currently.
Right. And
Actually, excuse me, we have one already together. We can email it to you. Barbara and Jennifer Boyd had put one together. So we can get that over to you. There is a list of broken down by small, medium, large, what it kind of landscape it needs and everything else.
sure. And my asking isn't because none of us are arborists or authorities of any kind in that. So I'm assuming that if the town manager or the Parks Department, or if there was a change that was going to be made, that's all I'm getting at, is there will be some sort of a reference as to what to plant.
This is Rob Ritchie. That list that we have is the preferred species that we'd like to see planted. Want to make sure everybody understands that's not all the species that may be present on Signal Mountain. That's the ones that we would prefer to see based on tree size, et cetera.
Gotcha.
Biodiversity.
This is Ann Haygood. I would like to note also on the following page, there is a field guide reference that will provide a lot more information about invasive plants that should not be used.
Do you mean on page 9 of the packet?
Well, I don't have your packet. It would be immediately following the definition of non-native invasive species.
I think it's page 8 of your packet, Dan.
Okay.
There's a publication underlined in your document, invasive plants of southern forests.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry. Well, all right, not that it matters, but that's not the way I'm finding that. Just so that it makes it work more
Yes.
quickly. Go ahead.
At the very top of that page we're looking at, underlined, invasive plants.
In
of southern-
black.
It's continued from the last
Okay.
page. Formatting
Okay.
is off.
Gotcha. I'm looking at my own, and that's what's confusing me with that. Okay. Yeah, let's go by the, so it's 13.5. I'm making notes on mine. I can't make notes on what's happening on the screen. So sorry about that. All right. Anybody else have any other questions regarding this section? Want to move down a page, Sam? Easier said than done, huh? All right, tree board shall have the authority to advise on and participate in the development of guidelines for landscaping and care of trees and shrubs in private developments. This is municipal property in private developments.
So this is within the section that's describing the authority and power of the tree board. So we're in this part of the ordinance, we're only discussing what the tree board can and can't do. So it's kind of it's enabling language that allows us to do.
So I guess
we have to assist the planning commission in the review of their ordinances. And so this is more of enabling language that we would think would be needed in order for us to have the ability to do that as the tree board.
yeah, so this is the one that I remember made me think that this goes beyond, just municipal landscape, because it does change the function of the tree board. And I'd like to hear from Harry and Boyd in this, if you see any red flags. I'm not against the idea. We just have to think about wording.
When I read this, I wondered if it, I think one of two things perhaps, that guidelines at some point needs to be defined as of whether or not they're, in some places you'll see guidelines as recommendations, and other places they are required. So it's hard to know to what extent you're regulating private development if you don't know exactly what guidelines means. And if they are to be recommendations, perhaps instead of guidelines, the word recommendations might be clearer, so that they're providing recommendations to developers as opposed to establishing guidelines that may be construed as requirements. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, does the word development make all of that not be so important? Because it's not saying they get to establish them and then they're law, but that they get to work in the development of them.
I think private development refers to such as subdivisions.
No.
Private developments. I mean, to me, the question is the tree board asking for authority to, in every situation, that every private developer of property on Signal Mountain has to go to the tree board for advice and participation on guidelines?
Well,
I think that's the intent, but
yeah,
shouldn't be, I guess.
and it's when I mentioned the word development, I was referring to the first time. The Department of Redundancy Department put the word in there twice. The fact that you're talking about developing guidelines, not enforcing guidelines and establishing guidelines, because the tree board can't change an ordinance anyway. The tree board can't change municipal code, correct?
Correct.
So do you have any thoughts? Could that maybe be cleaned up so that it says what it says and it doesn't lend itself to be misunderstood?
Would a reference to development of the Planning Commission's guidelines for landscaping and care of trees, would that suffice? I think part of our change here was that we've been requested to review and assist the Planning Commission in reviewing their ordinances, again, just from a tree board perspective on those. So we wanted to make sure we had the legal authority to actually do what we've been requested to do. And that's the genesis of this language in the enabling section. And we're not, I don't think, requiring that our approval is given to the final guidelines. It's just that, if we're going to be asked to advise, then we need that authority to at least participate.
Cheryl, you were chair of the Planning Commission for about 112 years or something like that. See any issue with this? I mean, it's always good to have help anyway on these things, and something besides just that group of people deciding everything.
Yeah, this had actually been the goal of the Planning Commission for many years, to have the tree board work hand in hand to help develop guidelines. So this is exactly what we had been asking for all that time. I think if you just, like Andrew said, if you just reword it a bit to add the Planning Commission in there somewhere, that the tree board shall work in concert with Planning Commission to develop blah, blah, blah.
Or upon request by the Planning Commission.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be great.
Something like that.
I was looking, isn't there at some point, I've read this how many times and now I can't find what I'm looking for, but doesn't it indicate that the tree board serves in an advisory capacity to the town council, the town manager, and the Planning Commission?
That is on the previous page 13-5.
Right. So establishing that the tree board functions in an advisory capacity to the to the planning commission, I think establishes the authority we're talking about, just not as specifically.
Right.
Yeah, we really skipped page page 13.5, I think, except for the invasive plants of southern forest that Ms. Haygood mentioned.
We did.
But in the second paragraph of 13.203 is what Boyd, I think, is referencing.
Right.
And it ought to say the tree board shall serve instead of serves, just a typo.
Yeah, there it says the tree board shall serve in an advisory capacity to the town council, the planning commission, which is an addition, and the town manager.
Right. So it seems like we're just defining a bit more what serving means in the paragraph we've been discussing. Does that seem reasonable?
I just think that on page 13.6, the tree board shall have the authority, et cetera. I think that sentence is unnecessary. I don't think it hurts, but I think it's unnecessary because section 13.203 already says that they shall serve in an advisory capacity. I'm not suggesting that that it's a problem if it's in there. I just think it's unnecessary.
Would it be better, would it work better if it was down under duties and responsibilities? That the duties and responsibilities including advising and participating in the development of planning commission guidelines for landscaping and care of trees and shrubs and private developments?
I think that would fit well.
Andrew, I'm not sure how, we haven't really talked about what next steps are with this. And I don't know if we need to go over Carol's notes and then have Harry take a look at it and give it back to you, or maybe we're not that far along. If you guys want to take some notes and then maybe make some modifications. And any thoughts on how we should do that, Harry?
Well, Carol, I mean, I don't mind making notes as to what we discuss and might ought to move around. I'm happy to try to do that.
What I was trying to, before we were to pass this as an ordinance, it would cross your desk. And my point is we aren't to that point yet from this discussion, because the tree board might want to look at something and go, now hold on a minute, that didn't accomplish what we wanted. They might want to do that as soon as we finish this meeting. So what do you think, Andrew? Do you think you guys would like to take items from this discussion, take a look at it, and then give us a revised document? Or do you want us to take items from this discussion and then later give you a revised document?
I don't have a particular preference, so I would leave it more to the discretion of the town council. We're certainly happy to, as we work through this and discuss revisions, to review what those revisions look like in a revised draft and get back to you.
Yeah, I think it probably makes sense for you guys to just jump on it and then give it back to us, if that's okay.
Okay.
And we'll have our notes that we can go over if that'd be more expedient. It won't get lost in committee shuffle as much that way. All right, anybody else have anything on this section? Are you comfortable with moving those sentences we just talked about under the duties and responsibilities somehow?
I think that's good.
Yes.
I do think there's one important note on that sentence we've been discussing, and that is that it, I think, for the first time establishes an opportunity for the tree board to consult with private developers and serve as a resource as to what's best to plant, where to plant. And to my knowledge, that's about the only reference that I've seen in this ordinance that pertains to private property versus public.
I don't think it's doing that though, Bill. I mean, if that's the intent, I think what it does is talks about planning the guidelines for landscaping and care of trees and shrubs in private developments, not directly working with private developments. But do you think that was the intent, Bill?
No, but I think it's important for the tree board to have the opportunity, you know, if there's some large scale development that's coming down the pike and a developer wants to clear cut everything and replace it with something else, I think it's important for the tree board to serve in a consultative manner to that developer should they choose to ask for assistance. And you know, it clearly in the last line of that sentence, you know, references private developments.
I think if that's the intent, I'd like to make that clearer. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Cheryl, I would say that you could channel the same planning commission board member that I'm thinking of right now, who would say the role of the planning commission doesn't include that scope, that we are only to judge whether or not people are doing exactly what's written down.
But if the tree board were to work alongside upon request of private developers, I mean, the end result could only be good.
I agree.
And they may well need it. I mean, I wouldn't mind at all if it said somewhere in here that, once again, upon request or if needed, if called upon, that the tree board would be willing to provide their expertise to local private developers.
I think that would be really helpful, actually.
Yeah, I think it needs to be stronger, Bill, if that's what it's intending to say. Because as boards change and as board members change and councils change and town managers change, it could be interpreted that, in my opinion, this looks like it's just talking about the planning of the guidelines, not the participation. And I also wonder, not to put a kink in it, if maybe something might need to be modified. Well, this is in our municipal code, so the planning commission has to follow municipal code.
Mm-hmm.
So if this gave some specific instruction to the planning commission, that would then govern that for the planning commission, right?
It would. Dan, could we not just, if we're going to move that down to 205, we not, we good? I think so. Just add another sentence or section below that that says something to the effect of, upon request from private developers, the tree board may also provide advice and input on matters relating to tree canopies and landscaping or something like that. I think having it separated and just giving the ability to do that as requested in a separate statement might be the cleanest way.
I think that would work.
Is that the intent, Bill, that it's as requested, or can the planning commission request that the developer work with the tree board on something, and how would that be resolved if there was a difference?
Well, I mean, on private property, it's up to the owner to make their own decision, but I'd sure like it to be clear that there is that resource available to the developer to help us maintain the canopy that we have now.
I think that's basically how it's worked recently, anyway, on a potential, it's a smaller project, but the planning commission encouraged the developer to talked to the tree board members and they agreed to do that and they provided that input. So I think, you would be getting into subdivision reg changes and everything else and making any sort of a requirement, but there's nothing to stop the planning commission from requesting a developer to seek input from the tree board.
Mhm.
As long as this says that upon that request being made, they're able to do that, we're in a lot better shape than we are now anyway. It's actually recorded.
Andrew, do you think that addresses that?
I think so. I think in making these changes, again, when we were going through this, our discussion on this point was that we're not looking to be involved with every private development on the mountain. That's too time consuming and not really our role as the tree board. What we were trying to do was just, we've been asked to assist the planning commission in their ordinance that they use when approving private developments. So we wanted to make sure our ordinance that gave us the legal ability to advise and to assist on those guidelines, but that if we were approached, from time to time to assist a private developer in the trees that they're going to plant and the landscaping for a private development, that we have that ability as well to assist. But again, we don't want it to be a requirement, when we're not asking that every private developer come to us. We understand that that's not our role and we don't want to do that.
Okay.
I'll let somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the gist of our discussion in the meeting.
All right. If no one else has anything, we can move on. Before we go on down and read the next section, Harry, is there anything that we need to go back to in 13.5 to visit that you?
On page 13.5.
Mm-hmm.
No, the only thing, I wondered why, the paragraph Boyd referenced earlier that started with the tree board shall serve, I wondered why all of that other duties was marked out. And then I realized when I went on further that it's added on page 13.6. So I don't think there's anything else on page 13-5 we need to discuss.
Okay. And you're muted. You're still muted. No, you're not.
Thank you. I'm not an attorney, of course, but section 13.204 is authority and power. And then 13.205 is duties and responsibilities. So my understanding in our discussion was that there is a difference. And that's why that sentence that we've just had discussion of was under authority and power, not under duty and responsibility. So I will let the attorneys amongst us talk about that if necessary, or if not necessary, I'll stop talking about it.
That comment I was the genesis of that comment. And part of that was, obviously the headings of these ordinances don't have any legal effect to them. I just thought that if someone was following along, it might make the most sense to have it in that section. And that's why we put the authority language in 204, and it's why we moved the duties and responsibilities paragraph to 205. But obviously, Harry will have his own thoughts, but I don't think the location at the end of the day doesn't have any legal effect. I just wanted it to be where it seemed to make the most sense.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply that moving it to 13.205 was somehow a problem. I think it's fine.
The word authority in there, I understand where you're coming from, Andrew, and I could see a benefit to that in that if you had a planning commission that says we do not have to listen to the tree board on this, that the tree board could say, no, actually you do, because we are a part of this process of developing guidelines for landscaping and care of trees and shrubs and private developments. Am I getting that correctly?
I think what you bring up, that's part of it. Again, my primary reason of bringing it was just, again, to make sure that there was legal authority under the ordinance. You know, the town council can't take certain acts unless they have the written authority to do it. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was something that said we had the legal ability to do it. I didn't anticipate us using this language as some sort of teeth against the planning commission in any sort of contentious way. I just wanted to make sure that if we were being asked, which we have already, to do this, that the ordinance be updated so that down the road, someone can't say that, you know, our assistance on that matter was illegal because we didn't have.
Okay. So going with what Harry said, and also what you said, that the titles and subtitles don't really have any specific extra meaning. It's okay for it to be in 205 as well.
Correct.
Can we just go on with that? Everybody okay?
Mhm.
All right. But thanks for the clarification, Ann. That helps to understand. All right. The other duties and responsibilities paragraph down 13.6, is that just copied from 205?
The large paragraph should be. I believe the last sentence is an addition that we just added as a catch-all. That to the extent we have a duty or a responsibility set forth in the ordinance, that we have the legal authority to act on those duties and responsibilities.
That sounds like legal talk. You all right with all that, Harry?
I'm fine with it. I mean, you've got the illegal whatever lawful authority you have whether that sentence is in there or not, in my opinion. But I don't think it hurts to have it in there. I would leave it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody okay with moving to 206?
I'll jump right in. The changes in 206 were after we referred to the Arbor Day Foundation's standards. And so those changes come from that. There wasn't anything specific other than the Arbor Day Foundation is kind of the leading authority on this issue. And we thought that it was good to be in line with their standards.
Anybody have any comments on that? If not, let's move on.
The same comment for 207.
Talk for just a minute about why the distances changed. I mean, I know why, but what the distances mean in terms of canopy, healthy ecosystem, and that.
I'll have to defer to Rob or one of our other more knowledgeable tree people that actually have experience in this. But these were the Arbor Day recommendations, and my guess, subject to Rob or someone else's further input, is that it relates to the health of the tree.
Yeah, it's the small ones are closer and the larger ones are farther apart, basically. Right?
But this is Rob. That's correct. We adopted the Arbor Day definitions on the sizes of the trees. And also later you'll see where it talks about the drip line. What we were trying to do is establish what the drip line's probably going to be for that type of tree in the future. So you don't get a lot of trees close together and then have to come back and thin them. Ann, have you got anything to add to that?
She shook her head no, but you're muted.
No, nothing to add. Thank you, Rob.
Okay. Is anyone have anything else? You comfortable moving on to the next section? Let's do so, Sam.
Let me ask one question real quick on page 13-7, the last sentence to the first paragraph. This section shall not apply to any trees and shrubs existing as of June 1, 2020. Is that necessary since you've added the 13.222, which grandfathers everything, or which grandfathers essentially says that that section doesn't apply to any tree existing as of June 1, 2020?
I would agree it's not needed. If that
I think it's duplicative.
is specifically referenced as a grandfather provision, I would agree with you that it's redundant and not needed.
You take care of that, Andrew?
Sure.
If I may, just to point out, in 209, same section Harry was just talking about, the restriction of planting any tree or shrub within 10 feet of any fire plug, hydrant. Just as a point of reference, the actual fire code sets that at 3 feet. And that's something we're going to be looking at, maybe discussing as early as Monday, adopting the new codes, building codes, electrical codes, and so forth. So that's a conflict we might need to keep in mind, that this requires further distance than the fire code does.
Like 10 times further then, Boyd.
3. It's 3 feet versus 10 feet.
And this would be for town-owned trees. Again, because this is the municipal ordinance related to town-owned property. So this would be for any trees on town property within 10 lateral feet of any fire plug. And that would be, that's language that was in the 2010 ordinance that we did not touch. So, yeah.
And all of the fire hydrants are going to be in right of way, which technically is not people's front yard, but they treat it as if it is, and there tends to be landscaping around fire hydrants and all. In that code, it just says you can't be within 3 feet of it. Again, just making the point that we have two different standards between this document and what we'll be looking at later, which we can, I don't know if we can adjust that one or not, but just something we have to keep in mind as we move forward.
All right. This moves in the direction that it doesn't make it worse for the utility, makes it better. You would rather not have something less than 3 feet. You'd rather have it more than 3 feet.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So we can leave this, I think, unless anybody has any objections. Public tree care. This gets into the specifics of obligations of the town. Town of Signal Mountain shall plant, prune, maintain, and remove trees and shrubs within the boundaries of right-of-way of all streets, alleys, avenues, lanes, park, public grounds as may be necessary to ensure public safety and general welfare, and to achieve the goals and follow the guidelines in the town's land use plan. I'll just jump right to it. I like that. How does the current town manager feel about that?
That addition is fine. I mean, I think that's been the goal all along. But I don't think that more clearly states overall goal and objective.
All right, so then anybody else have any other comments on that? You're right, because we are to follow the land use. Well, I guess it would come down to what following the land use plan means.
And that goes back to that guidelines word, because that is what the land use plan is. they're guidelines that we would strive to follow, but they're used and applied and assessed in each individual case to try to come out with the best outcome.
Does a guideline have weight in decision making?
Yes. And I think that may be a good way to look at it, some in the interpretation of what a guideline is. Generally, the way I see it, and we try to use them, is just that. They have weight, they help us in making a decision. Sometimes they may be perceived as being what makes the decision, and that they have to be followed.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add to that? I mean, those are subtle, but they matter. All right. So the next paragraph might be the more complicated one. The town manager, upon recommendation by the tree board, or after consultation with a professional forester or an international society of is it pronounced arboriculture? Arboriculture? Certified arborist at his or her discretion upon recommendation by the, you took the one his or her out, you might take that second one out. So then all the rest is what was already there. So speaking as a town manager, is there any part of this that feels complex for you, Boyd?
Well, it just changes the authority as it was. I did have discretion in general, and as it stands now, it appears my only discretion is whether I get advice from a professional forester or an ISA arborist, but that I have to get it. But as I read it, if Loretta were to make a recommendation, then I wouldn't have to do that. So I'm not, and I'll say that as long as authority and responsibility and accountability all live in the same house, I don't necessarily have an issue with it. But if I'm charged with being responsible for safety issues and things like that, I think that's the only thing I see that could be problematic.
Andrew, you want to talk about the wording and the intent?
Sure. I think this paragraph, we're really looking at two different scenarios here. The first scenario, so the first changes are related to, I guess what we would call problem trees that pose a health and safety hazard. And there, what we're looking is that there is some sort of consultation either with the tree board or with an arborist or a professional forester in determining what is I guess a problem tree that could be removed. There have been instances in the past. I don't know of any personally, though I've heard of some where there have been a large number of trees that have been clear cut as a means of these were essentially problem trees. And there's no issue with that if they are in fact problem trees. I think that we're looking there just for some consultation. The move of the language at her discretion was put after the recommendation by tree board or the consultation, just to make to emphasize that either the recommendation or the consultation are prerequisites or prior to that. The second part is the last change to that paragraph, which is if it's not a problem tree, then the town manager would be required to consult before removing any other tree that the town owns.
Right. It seems like there's a third one in there. One is the determination of whether or not something's a problem. Who makes that determination or who verifies that determination? Are aesthetics considered to be potential problems?
I do think it still leaves in discretion of the town manager. And there is obviously the I guess, circumstance after that language, which actually allows for the recommendation of the Director of Public Works to I guess, decide the matter. So if the Director of Public Works came to the town manager and said there are trees that we think the town owns that pose a health and safety issue, which I would think should be a town concern because of liability, that the Director of Public Works, on their recommendation, the town manager could have those cut down. Or the town manager could, upon recommendation by the tree board or after consulting with professionals, in his or her discretion, decide the same.
Can I ask something? We have a municipal forestry and development policy for the town of Signal Mountain that was adopted in October of 2012. And it lays out when trees should be removed. And if we're thinking of the same scenario, the trees that were removed here at Town Hall fit that perfectly. So took that guideline and evaluated the scenario, and it fit, and we took the action on that. Again, I'm not necessarily arguing it. I just don't. I want to make sure that we understand. Generally, when there's a change, is because there was an issue. And in that case, there were 3 trees here at Town Hall. 2 were removed, and both of them fit one of the criteria for removal. The 3rd tree, we had an arborist look at, and he agreed that it needed to come down. And at that time reviewed the issue with the other 2 trees, and they concurred that they were a problem. So again, I'm just not sure if we have guidelines to follow, do we also need to enlist an arborist to address issues like that?
Would it be possible, though, that it would be no more egregious unless there's an emergency and the Public Works Director can say, look, this is an emergency, it has to be addressed, that you took all of the information in that scenario or another scenario like that and said, tree board, this is what we think should happen? And they might say,
I have no problem with that if that's the requirement of, or the wish of council. I mean, you know, this is up to council to determine, and the guidelines will be followed.
right,
Previously, that was not a requirement.
right.
We had this document that gave guidance as to how we were to address these things, and we followed that. So again, as I've said, I'm not necessarily objecting. Just understand that what we did previously was within guidelines. If we want to change the guidelines, that's fine. But wasn't because anything was done inappropriately.
Right. And I don't think that's what's really being discussed here. I mean, unless it's more so than I'm seeing. But going forward, if you've got a reason to do something and you've already got your ducks in a row for that, it doesn't seem to me like it would be much more of a step to just inform the tree board and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. Do you agree, or do you think we need to have an arborist? And I guess that's kind of maybe the compromise I'm thinking. Does it need to be that it has to be done? Or if you have something that needs to be done, the public works director can say this needs to be done and it gets done. Right, Andrew? I mean, that's what you guys are saying. So that part's taken care of.
Right, and that's what happens now in all of the right-of-way work.
Right.
Loretta creates the tree list every year. They go around in the summer when it's most obvious and note dead trees in the right-of-way. The only trees in the right-of-way we take out are either dead or dangerous. Otherwise, we don't.
What it seems to me the purpose of this is for the tree board to be involved in landscaping of municipal properties, which is sort of what this is talking about. And that
which the public works director doesn't generally
do.
In.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
And again, I have no issue with if council wants those things to go through the tree board, that is fine. I'm not arguing that point at all. The one thing I would say that is as strictly as this is written is we would have to go through this whole process even if a tree was undoubtedly dead, because it doesn't differentiate. It's in any tree. So
is it possible, and I might be way out in left field here, that there could be a member of the tree board, so the whole tree board wouldn't have to meet, you wouldn't have to work through the cycle of something needed to be done, you present your case to someone from the tree board and they can say yes, or we think we need to have the tree board talk about that. Is that out in left field, Andrew?
I don't think so, but I would have to defer to the more senior members of the tree board. I think again that the instance that Boyd described, I think what ended up happening is actually within the changes that we recommended in the document, in that ultimately for the third tree, an arborist was, the opinion of an arborist was sought, and then the arborist agreed as to the first two. And so it was really just, if that had been done on the front end, then everything would have been met under the change that we have here. The last change to this paragraph is really for basically any tree that's not dead or posing a safety hazard, is when we would want to be consulted. And again, we understood that this would be a change that was going to be discussed, and tried to leave deference in here to the Director of Public Works. We don't want to rubber stamp every instance of tree removal in the town.
Just as hopefully most of y'all know me enough to understand where I'm coming from on this. It's not, but the Director of Public Works, and Loretta and I spoke about this earlier today, this requires me to get authority from one of my subordinate staff members. I'm not sure how that fits.
I'll admit that's a great distinction you point out there, and it's not one that we noted or thought of in our discussion.
Right. And I keep saying this because I truly mean it. If general practice needs to be running things through the tree board, I'm not arguing that point. I just want to make sure we're thinking through how all of things work within the general operational makeup of the town and how we do things and whose responsibilities are what. I have no qualms with changing some of the processes. Just want to make sure we think through how exactly that works.
Well, we have to think about this not as Boyd's law, because you have town managers and you have to write things so that they work. Can we take another swing? I see what Boyd's saying. It seems like going through the tree board, having the town manager putting this simply, have the town manager work with the tree board in some organized manner, systematic manner before trees get cut down seems like a reasonable request.
And again, don't dispute that. I think if there's some consideration for, just obvious scenarios when we have trees that are absolutely dead and need to be removed because if they're anywhere in close proximity to a town facility, then they are obviously a hazard. Situations like that should be pretty straightforward. If it's a matter of removing a live tree, absolutely wouldn't be an issue at all to engage the tree board.
Yeah, so I go back to the thing, you can engage the tree board and the tree board might say yes, or a representative of the tree board as is designated might just say yes, or they might say, this might be able to be saved. Maybe we need to have an arborist look at this. Could we get that wording in there? And I'm just one person with an idea. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
This is Rob. I think from my recollection of us going through this, that was the intent. It wasn't to say, every tree that gets cut down has to go through this big laborious process, especially if it's already identified as a potential problem to actual town property, or if the tree itself is dead or obvious that it's dying and not going to be able to be recuperated. And so that what you're saying makes sense. It's just coming to the best way to word that.
If that differentiation is in there, that changes things dramatically. And that's really my only concern.
Andrew, can you guys take another shot at that?
Sure.
Then let's move on.
And before we get off of 211, and this is nothing to do with anything you guys did, it's just as I was reading through this, that last section really, I don't understand. No ground disturbing activity by private contractors or subcontractors shall occur within the drift line of any tree on town property without first receiving written permission from the building official. Unless this specifically refers to trees in the right of way, where I might see that happening. And right of ways technically aren't town property. The public property controlled by the town. So when you say town property, to me, I think of in a park or something like that. So if they're doing work on our property, they're because we've hired them to do the work. And if the drift line of this tree protrudes over a property line, we can't restrict people from working on their own property because we have a tree that's large enough that its canopy overlaps the property line. So I think this is one we may need to look at as well. Because I just don't understand it.
Well, I could see a scenario. Let's say the library gets underway with its expansion and it's got that wonderful tree back behind the library that's got a wide drip line, and that's town property. That the and I think what you're going to say is this is covered already in our building code. That great care would have to be gone to make sure that dirt doesn't get piled up on the root system of that tree, and which wouldn't kill it right then, but might kill it later. It's that kind of thing. And I guess my second question would, maybe this is a hairy question. If my neighbor has a big, beautiful tree and it hangs over in my yard, am I allowed to inject poison in to kill that tree because I don't like the nuts falling in my yard?
Remind me not to live next door to you, okay?
I don't know the answer to that question. It comes up periodically. I think there is some protection, legal protection, even if the tree is on my property. I think you have some rights. I don't think you can poison a tree on my property because it falls on your property, because it somehow affects your property. I think you may have the right to require me to prevent damage to your property by my tree.
A better example would be putting in a septic system.
You mean if you put a septic system on your property and it damages the roots of a tree on adjoining property and causes it to die? And we've got a whole bucket full of attorneys on this thing, so I'm gonna.
That's why I'm asking questions and not offering answers.
I think you can. If my tree overhangs your property, I think you can trim the limbs that overhang your property. If you can legally place a septic system on your property and it inadvertently does damage to the tree, there may be some,
I don't think it's that easy to answer. That's why there are lawsuits.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
Should you have known that it would just damage my tree?
Yeah. I don't know that this does it, but that's the whole part of this big general question is how do we protect our canopy? And does the land use plan help with that? Does what the town does with its landscaping help with that? And that's the purpose here. And that's why I'm asking that, not to make this meeting go on for a long time. Okay.
And on this other section, to me, again, I'm just saying, in that scenario you gave with the library, we've hired the contractor, so we will direct them what not to do, and requiring them to get a $10 permit to do work that we've hired them to do just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But that comes with not being engaged when this was written. People involved with that conversation probably knew exactly what they were intending for it to address. I don't know what that is.
Any council members involved in that? Bill or Cheryl? No?
I don't know.
Not that I recall.
Well, why don't we remove that if we're in the process of cleaning up code? If it doesn't actually do anything.
Okay. I'll look at it a little further, and then when we get closer to an end product, we can address that as well.
Okay. Everybody okay to move on?
Do you mind if I make a quick comment? I'm sorry.
Go.
Just something occurred to me. When you were discussing possibly a member of the tree board having authority to sort of sign off on something, I'll just say if we were to move in that direction, we would want to specify that within this document, because right now it only gives authority to the board, to the tree board, not to representative thereof. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Andrew, that also, you can figure that in as you're working on that section. Is that okay?
That works for me.
Okay.
I did have one comment on this paragraph that Boyd was referencing. It's my own personal thought on it, and that's that it is at least broad enough that if a town's tree had a drip line that encroached, may be the wrong word, but was extended out over onto private land, that any contractor working on that private land would need written permission from the town's building official before performing that work. And it would be similar to any other building code or planning commission type approval as to private property. That's my personal interpretation. I think it is broad enough.
That's kind of how I interpret it too, and I don't know if we have the authority to do that. Before you work on your property, you have to get our permission because we have a tree in close proximity to the property line. I understand what we want to accomplish by it, but I'm just questioning if we really have that ability.
That's fair. I wouldn't know.
I would doubt it. I can't say that I know for sure.
And that's my concern. When we look at these, we just try to look at anything that ultimately might move the town from a position of comfort and defensibility. That I don't know if we can defend that position very well. So like I said, we'll look into it some more, but I just wanted to point it out.
Well, as you look into it, my question would be, and we don't have to discuss this now, but are there other towns that do have that ability? Is it just the way our code is written? Is it a Tennessee thing? Is it possible to say that you at least need to, from an advisory standpoint, take into consideration, town property and other people's trees? I mean, maybe not. I don't know.
In that regard, I don't know that we would have any legal authority that any other property owner wouldn't have. If we could take that position, then I think anybody could take that position relative to an adjacent property owner.
We can tell somebody that they can't put in a liquor store within certain number of feet from a school or a church. Seems like this is the same in a very different way.
What about building permits? You can't build a certain structure on your private land without a permit from the town. Are there building permit requirements in Signal Mountain? Because I would see this as somewhat similar to that sort of restriction.
Well, the only trigger in this scenario is that we have a tree that's close to your property. Thus, you wouldn't be able to use your property in the same manner as anyone else. The building permits and setbacks and all that's universal. That applies to everybody. This would be a unique situation to property that happens to be adjacent to town property. And only that property owner is hindered in the use of their property because they happen to be next door to one of our properties. Again, I get why we would like that. I'm just not sure we can do it.
Yeah, it's complicated because it speaks to the larger potential environmental disaster that's, unfolding everywhere. And that if you were building next to a place that was an aviary, you can do something in your yard that kills everything. And not sure how we address that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that the town should be treated differently. I'm wondering or I'll give you another example, and this is just for the tree board to consider, and I don't know what the answer to this is. Before I was on the council, I remember being a bit aghast at what can happen when a subdivision's going in if a mistake takes place. And I remember asking a developer, what happens if you knock down a tree that you're not supposed to knock down? And their responsibility is they have to remove the tree they knocked down. We don't have anything within our municipal code that says they have to replant the tree, or that there's a penalty for that, or they have to replant a certain kind. So I think there's more work to be done, and that this document isn't doing that, I understand. That moves in the direction of taking better care of our canopy so that during building, we've got all kinds of ways to address this. And maybe it doesn't get addressed in this because this isn't the right place for that. Not to put a nail on this for now, but maybe we should move on and recognize that we have a lot more work to do. Is that okay? Everybody all right with that? All right, let's head down, Sam. So the whole pruning, tree topping, and all of this, and I might just have missed this, so forgive me, how does this apply to our conservation easement land and view shed?
The land trust of Tennessee that holds the conservation easement does permit view shed clearing. And that was my question with this. I understand that in the vast majority of cases it's not desirable, but we have scenarios like Signal Point and our overlook parks where ultimately trees grow up and start obstructing the view. And we have in the past gone in and topped and cleared to reestablish that view shed. We have other scenarios where we have property owners that own adjacent to our properties that have the same difficulty in river gorge views that exist until they don't because of the growth of the trees. So we need to determine if this is as strict as written or if there are times when there could be exceptions.
Andrew, do you guys want to talk about that as a board?
Sure, happy to. I think just as general background on this, our comment in 213 was not meant to prohibit it. It was more to make sure that if it's going to take place on town property, that there's a consultation. And using the word consultation doesn't mean that the decision of that consultation, is that whatever the tree board or the arborist decide is the decision that has to be taken. And obviously we'll discuss this as the tree board, but I personally, as a member of the tree board, would have no problem stating that whatever terms are in the town's conservation easements, supersede and govern over any conflict with our municipal landscape ordinance. In fact, they probably have that effect anyways.
Right.
The majority of our changes in 214, at least the first changes, were that we did not, that was language in the 2010 ordinance that we as the tree board did not quite understand why it was in there. And we couldn't make quite a lot of sense out of it, thinking that the majority of properties that exist today are violating that language, and we went ahead and struck it. And then the last change in 214 is not really a change. We just moved that language down to 215 because that's the section discussing dead, diseased, and dangerous trees.
Boyd, if you're speaking, you're muted.
You have to cough one time and then you. Yeah, 214, I don't see any issue. My concern was just with 213. But I mean, it starts out that it should be unlawful to top any of the trees in the parks. And then the notwithstanding the foregoing, which regardless of the foregoing, the tree board and the town manager shall consult an ISA certified arborist for recommendations before reducing the canopy. So the way I read this, and it talks about in the guide that I referred to earlier, it differentiates between reducing canopy and topping. So to me, 213, as it has, says you can't top trees, and you have to we would have to consult an arborist or forester before we reduce the canopy, which I took as two different things. And again, absent those few exceptions, when we're talking about other significant attributes to our community in these views that we have, I wouldn't see any reason, nor would I have a desire to do any topping. But the way I read this, it's pretty cut and dry. I want to make sure that that's the intent.
Yeah, maybe some wording in there, Andrew, that basically addresses the parks and the view shed. And I agree completely. It should not just be somebody going out there with a chainsaw to clean it up. On top of all that, all the view shed, all of those places are on steep slopes and create additional fire hazard and all kinds of things if they're done incorrectly. So does that need to be in this document, or is that handled somewhere else? Maybe, Boyd. I think what Andrew said about the conservation easement, sure, all of that applies, but it doesn't tell you how to top trees. And I don't think it talks about view shed, right?
In the conservation easement?
Right. Does it prescribe it?
The method?
Mm-hmm.
No. I think and I'm trying to remember if it specifically lists it as I think it actually says in there that trees can be cut, trimmed, whatever, to maintain or reestablish view shed. My practice in prior situations has been to ask them anyway. And that way we have something on file, shoot them an email and make sure they're good with it before we do it. But it doesn't get into practices or methods for the topping. And I think the main thing in this situation with, if you're actually going to be reestablishing a view, I think topping is pretty much what you're left with. Otherwise, you're just lessening the obstruction as opposed to removing the obstruction of the view.
Right. The inclusion of an arborist and all that seems like it's a necessity also just to prevent erosion and other things that, by improperly topping trees and killing the trees and letting the hillside wash away. So, anyway, Andrew, you're gonna maybe see if you can tweak that so that this accounts for that. And
Sure, we'll look at it.
yeah, I understand what you said. 13-214 isn't that, but I interpreted that apparently the same way Boyd did with 12-213. So, and we want to avoid misunderstandings. All right. Anybody have anything else on under 13.8? If all right, move on, please, Sam. The word owners in this, Andrew, are we talking about the town?
Sorry, I'm gonna have to come to it in just a second. I was writing the note down.
Sorry about that.
Just a minute.
If you're talking about in 215, Dan, this is referencing on private property.
I don't understand how that's in our. Well, no, okay, never mind. This is the responsibility of the tree board. We're still in that overall section. No, this is in the municipal landscape ordinance. How does that work?
I don't know. And on a related topic, we kind of just skipped over the property maintenance section, the lot clearance. The whole title is property maintenance. When we look at building code, electrical code, all of that this time through, we are going to recommend council adopt the property maintenance code, which we never have. We have things spattered throughout the code about junk cars and trash and things like this. It's just rather haphazard in our code. So we're going to look at adopting the property maintenance code, which will address a lot of this stuff in a more concise, complete, and consolidated manner.
You see my question, Andrew?
In 215?
13-215, yeah. I mean, we're jumping out of municipal landscaping into private property.
I mean, that I agree that that's probably the case. I will say that this was language.
No, you didn't do it.
That was in the 2010 ordinance that, we were working with what we had. And, as a member of the tree board, I would say that I would want the town to have the ability to have some authority to cause its residents to remove dead, diseased, or dangerous trees, or at least treat diseased trees that may have the ability to recuperate. And our primary change there, as you'll see at the end, was to add some sort of obligation so that at least failing that obligation, the town could take some sort of enforcement action. Again, we're looking here at, as the tree board, we're concerned with the health and the preservation of the town's trees and the canopy for long-term protection of this community. And so we would be on board with this sort of language being in there and think it's a necessary item. Obviously, we don't have the ability to make that decision on behalf of the council, and the council may not have the ability to have it legally. And so I can't address that piece, but I think personally that, and on behalf of the tree board, we'd like to see something like this in there. And it's been in there for at least 10 years.
This is Rob Ritchie. The way I've taken 214 and 215 in the past, and maybe the wording really doesn't get there the more I read it here, but I've always taken this to be public, private property and trees and shrubbery on private property that could be a hazard to town property or roadways, etc. I didn't ever take this if my tree may fall in my neighbor's yard. I took this that my tree may fall into the public property. Is that not the way other people read it?
Rob, this is Andrew. That's the way I read it. I do think it applies to trees on private property, but I think it's limited. The intent was to limit it in scope to those trees on private property that threaten obviously life or property, or other trees that are on town property.
That's the way I took it. But whether or not it actually reads that way, now that it gets questioned, I'm not so sure that that's clear.
The way it's written, it appears to apply to any trees within the town.
And it's interesting. So Andrew, when you say town trees, that could mean a couple of different meanings, town of Signal Mountain, property trees or not. And what Boyd said earlier, if this whole section was moved into the maintenance part that you're working on, Boyd, it would have more authority.
Yeah, I've got a note to look closely at the property maintenance code will be recommended to see if these things are specifically addressed there. If they are, then they can just be pulled from this section.
Can we look at that and get back with you on that, tree board?
Yes.
I don't think anybody here disagrees that it's good code. It just needs to be in the spot where it does the most good. And that then also, Robert, would still make it apply towards town property as well.
Right. Okay, that makes sense to me.
All right, unless anybody else has anything to add, move on, Sam.
I believe this is where you're moving to.
Oh, you did already, okay.
Yes, sir.
Just a question, 13.218. I'm guessing that was written so that tree board members could go and take a look at property that is potentially going to be developed. No?
I wouldn't think so, because I don't know that they have the inherent authority to enter private property for inspection.
And 218 does make reference to on public
Oh,
ground.
it does. I missed that. Sorry.
It's one of those, when you read it, I can't really imagine when that would happen.
Right.
But I guess if it does, this establishes the prohibition.
Apparently there were some contentious encounters once upon a time. All right, the removal of the words under violation. Do you want to talk about that? Anything significant there, Andrew?
Nothing significant. I think what in 219 there, we just defaulted to an ISA certified arborist, because who knows if that the guide that's referenced there is still in effect today, or what it's going to say in the future. It's a guide published by the ISA, but rather than rely on that, we thought as long as there's an arborist that's certified, then that should be just as good authority.
Anybody have anything else on this? We're nearing the end of the section. Thanks everybody for sticking with this. You have any issues with the may to shall, Boyd or Harry?
No.
Harry, you okay? You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's fine if that's what, removes any discretion is all it does.
So what's it changed? Give us an example, Andrew.
I think the primary effect of the change in 220 would be if there is, I guess, a town staff member that violates, that actually does something against the requirements in the ordinance, that the tree board and the director of public works at least has some input as to the results of the investigation, if possible. And the genesis of this was, I believe the genesis of this was some concern about at least some sort of enforcement. What sort of teeth does this ordinance have? We would think that there should be some sort of consequence that could occur if there's a violation. And so that was our primary, I think, reason for that change.
I would say that I did not anticipate this being applicable to a staff member. I take this as a contractor. If a staff member does something they shouldn't, violates policy or practice, that's an employment issue that would strictly fall to me.
And apologies if it sounded this way. I don't think we're trying to get involved in some sort of HR situation here. I think is the resolution to the issue should require consultation with the tree board and also the director of the public works. If there is a violation that creates an issue, that needs to be resolved. I think we would like to have the ability to recommend a resolution to that. Again,
Why the director of public works? Just because the wording was there?
yes. And we struck the or as a means of, not skirting the obligation to get a recommendation from the tree board.
It seems that in this the instance that you gave, if it was a member of town staff, that the town manager would be the person representing that person, whatever the thing was that needed to be ameliorated, and that the town council would probably be the body. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to think out loud. We're back to that. If Boyd's the person representing the member of staff, this is really what this means. And I didn't read it to mean that. So I'm just going off what you said, Andrew. That goes back to the situation where he's dealing with a subordinate for amelioration. Yeah, I'm not sure where the teeth bite within this.
Yeah, I've never, until he said that, never even occurred to me that this would apply to, because they're not acting at the will of the town. They are the town. They're a town representative. And if they do something inappropriate, then that's for me to deal with. If this is a contractor, a utility worker, something like that, then that's a whole another scenario where we would look at what they needed to do to correct the scenario, and getting input from the tree board is fine. And in some instances, I might seek input from the Director of Public Works, but I don't know that it would be appropriate for me to be required to do that.
I don't think we were looking for a requirement there. I think we were looking for a requirement for a recommendation from the tree board. And striking the word "or" was more of a way of trying to avoid a situation where the town manager opted to go with the director's recommendation as opposed to seeking one from the tree board.
What about removing the reference to the Director of Public Works and replace it with the town manager? And that would seem to me to say that the tree board and the town manager would consult on the issue.
I think we would just, to make that change have effect, would just be to strike everything after the words tree board.
I think that would
reference prior.
Everybody good with that proposed change?
It could say which shall include a recommendation by the tree board and may include a recommendation by the Director of Public Works, because that then at least would give some additional, I guess, authority if the town manager wanted to have a recommendation by the director, but it's not an obligation.
Right. I have the ability to seek input from any of my department heads on any matter. That doesn't need to be stated there.
Right.
The Director of Public Works is a department head like the police chief or the fire chief, and it doesn't need to be stated that I can seek input from them.
I suspect, only a guess, when this was written, it was about Public Works would be actually doing something where there would be heavy equipment on the ground, moving trees, moving earth, stacking things up, and I suspect that's the reason that's in there.
I don't think you're going to get any argument from the tree board if you strike "and the Director of Public Works" and just put a period after tree board.
All right, if everyone's okay with that, let's go to the next page. Wait, go back, Sam. Because this is old, let's look at that appeal and make sure. Yeah, all right, now, if everybody's okay, move on to the rest of that paragraph.
And that's just as a point, that really kind of speaks to the fact that this is addressing an issue other than an employee, because there's not that appeal to town council in an employment matter.
Okay, next page, Sam. All right. Any questions there? Straightforward. This is what Harry was referring to at the beginning of the meeting. All right, last page.
I believe that's all.
That is the last page.
Is it? Yeah.
Should that 222 also say shrubs? Because in some sections, like with fire hydrants and things like that, it also says trees and shrubs. Should this reference both as well?
Would it somehow say, bring us a shrubbery at some point?
My
Sorry.
recollection, Boyd, is that we discussed that as the tree board and thought that really what we were doing there was trying to not be draconian in the way that this applies to town trees and to state that, obviously there are trees existing today that nobody's had issue with that may be violating. And so those should be grandfathered. Shrubs are, of a lot smaller size, obviously, and an entirely different nature than a tree. We can throw that back into discussion to see if that would bring effect to, I guess, the ordinance, to add that in as part of, we're already following up on other items. We could add that back into the discussion. But I do recall we made the distinction to only state trees in that for a particular reason.
You okay with that? Boyd?
Yes, sir.
I think we're done, guys. Anything else that we have, anybody? Anything we need to add to wrap this up? We'll wait to hear from the tree board. Maybe, I don't know that we need to do this again, but I guess we should wait and see the document, then decide that. So what should Andrew do with the document? Where should it go?
If at this point, since we've been through it in detail, if he wants to send it to me, and then I'll share it with Harry, and we'll give it pretty much the same general approach we do on other ordinances, and make sure that things are good from the legal side and all, and then I can forward it on to council for review.
All council members okay with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
And on a related note, before I forget, the agenda for Monday's meeting specifically held, not being sure where this discussion was going to go and what we might need to do relative to this on Monday. So since we now know that, and we're not going to have anything relative to this on the agenda, I'll get that out as early as possible tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. I think we're done. Did you determine if you're going to stay on this meeting, Andrew, and just have your meeting now?
I'll leave that to Joe. I don't know if Joe was on the call when that issue was being discussed, but
I'll just I sent out an invitation to all of y'all, and we'll just sign that.
the issue is that we are obligated to record that as part of the sunshine law. So we'll have to record our tree board meeting that we have. And so the town council was offering that we either stay on this Zoom meeting because it's being recorded, or if we go to our own, we'll have to use the record function that you'll have for running the meeting, which is under the more button at the bottom.
Yeah, either one doesn't really make any difference to me, whatever's easiest for everyone.
If you guys have the ability to record it and can forward that to us, then that would free Mr. Ewing up for the evening.
I think that would probably make the most sense for archival purposes as well, to have this as one meeting, and then we'll start a fresh one and record, and then there'll be a separate meeting we could send to you.
Okay.
And if y'all just want to forward that recording to me, I'm the one who, SGUIN at signalmountaintn.gov, the one who sent you the invite to this meeting. You just want to reply and send that to me. That would be much appreciated.
Okay.
All right. If there are no objections, I don't see anybody objecting, I consider this adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Council.